Washington, D.C., the Senate hearing room was a pressure cooker. Air stiff with tension. Spotlights too hot. Cameras humming like insects circling a flame. The polished mahogany desks gleamed under the lights, but no one was looking at the woodwork. They were watching her. Caroline Leavitt, young, sharp, and unshakably poised, sat tall before the committee. Her expression? Calm steel. Not defiant, not defensive. Just ready. Across from her, Senator Adam Schiff reclined in his chair, the smirk of a man rehearsing his punchlines already curling on his lips. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk, voice dripping with derision. So tell us, Miss Leavitt, what's it like being the administration's echo chamber in heels? Laughter. Low. Cruel. A couple of senators chuckled like schoolboys. The air snapped with tension. Flashbulbs popped. Somewhere in the observation area, President Trump folded his arms. Melania leaned in slightly, eyes fixed on Caroline. Leavitt didn't blink. Not once. Schiff, sensing blood, pushed harder. Do you actually know what you're doing here? Or are you just the latest PR puppet trying to polish up Trump's mess with Instagram filters? Another ripple of laughter. One senator coughed to hide a grin. Reporters scribbled furiously. The camera zoomed in. All eyes on her. She moved slowly. Deliberately. No flinch. No panic. Then, she spoke. Voice low. Calm. Controlled like a drawn bow. I came here today to speak truth. But clearly, truth makes some of you uncomfortable. Silence. A few raised eyebrows. Schiff narrowed his eyes, his grin faltering. Truth? From you? He scoffed. Please. Enlighten us. Leavitt didn't rise. She didn't shout. She just reached, one smooth motion, for a single document on her desk. Heavy. Stamped with an official seal. The kind of paper that carries weight and consequences. I wasn't planning to bring this up, she said, tapping it lightly. But since we're suddenly so interested in honesty. She slid the paper forward. Schiff stared. Frowned. His fingers twitched. And then she dropped the bomb. Senator Schiff, while you question my credentials, your name appears in an active federal investigation, linked to the misallocation of $12 million in COVID relief funds. The hearing room detonated. Gasps. Shouts. The air cracked. Journalists surged. Phones lit up like wildfire. The chairman banged the gavel so hard it echoed like a gunshot. Order. Order in this room. Melania Trump turned to her husband and whispered, breathless. She actually did it. Schiff's face drained of color. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Fabrication, he finally exploded. This is political theater. You're desperate. But Leavitt cut him off, not with volume, but with precision. No, Senator. I'm not desperate. I'm just done letting people like you twist the truth and call it leadership. Audience, stunned. Shaken. Stirred. Senator Jennifer Morgan leaned toward her colleague and whispered, did she just end his career? Senator Robert Bell didn't blink. She lit the match. He poured the gasoline. Caroline stood now, holding the document up. This isn't just evidence. This is a mirror. For every American watching, this is what happens when mockery replaces duty. When power becomes performance. In the corner of the room, a young intern from Virginia, wide-eyed, barely old enough to vote, wiped a tear from his cheek. Schiff stood again, voice cracking. You're a mouthpiece. Just another mouthpiece. Leavitt didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. And you, Senator, are out of excuses. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thunderous. Back in the observation gallery, President Trump leaned toward his wife, his voice quiet, heavy with approval. That's what leadership looks like. No yelling. Just facts. And fire. Chaos had officially arrived. Schiff's aides were on their phones, some calling lawyers, others donors. Reporters raced to file. Headlines exploded across screens. Breaking: Leavitt levels Schiff in stunning Senate hearing. Press secretary delivers devastating truth bomb on live TV. And as the cameras cut, Caroline Leavitt didn't smile. She just walked out. Quiet. Steady. In the hallway, an elderly janitor in a faded army cap stepped into her path. A Vietnam vet. He extended his hand, trembling slightly. "For speaking up," he said. "Thank you." She shook it firmly. "For serving first," she replied. "Thank you." "You did what I fought for in Vietnam," the veteran said, voice roughened by time. "You stood up and told the truth, when it would have been easier to stay silent." Caroline Leavitt simply nodded. No need for thanks. No need for praise. This wasn't about ego. It was about conscience. Back at her office, her phone hadn't stopped buzzing. Calls poured in from all over the country: red states, blue states, forgotten towns, frontline cities. From governors and grieving widows. From factory workers and farmers. From preachers and single moms. Then, a quiet voice on the line. A teacher from rural Idaho. "I showed my civics class your clip," she said, almost in disbelief. One student cried. Said it was the first time they'd ever seen someone stand up for people like their dad, who got laid off and never saw a dime of that relief money. Leavitt's vision blurred. She turned to her aide. "Contact the Justice Department," she said. Her voice didn't waver. "If that money was misused, people were robbed. I want a formal investigation opened. No spin. Just truth." The aide hesitated, visibly shaken. "Caroline, this will unleash a war on the Hill." Leavitt stood straighter. Her jaw set. "Then let it." Outside, Adam Schiff pushed through a mob of reporters, trying to keep his composure as cameras flashed and microphones crowded his face. "Senator. Do you deny the evidence? Did you divert COVID funds? What about the $12 million? His voice cracked. No comment. But his eyes betrayed the storm behind the words. Inside the Capitol, the room had mostly cleared out. But one figure remained. Congresswoman Jennifer Murphy, young, rising, and visibly shaken, approached Leavitt. Her voice trembled. "My dad was a long-haul trucker. He caught COVID on the road. His company never got any relief. He died alone in a hospital bed. You gave voice to a truth I've been carrying around like a stone for years." Leavitt didn't speak. She opened her arms. And a congresswoman stepped into them, breaking down. That evening, while the capital city pulsed with reaction and media spin, Leavitt returned to her desk. It was quiet. Almost eerily so. An unmarked envelope sat on the table. No return address. Just her name, handwritten. Inside, a child's letter. "Dear Miss Leavitt. My name is Linda and I'm 10. My mom cried when she saw you on TV. She said you made her believe again. My dad always said, Washington doesn't care. But I think you do. Thank you for making my mom smile. It's been a long time since she did." Leavitt clutched the letter to her chest. This was never about headlines or hearings. This was about Linda. Her mom. Families whose pain had been turned into policy talking points. She switched on the TV. Schiff was there, animated, defensive. "This is nonsense. A smear job. A setup." But something had changed. No one was leaning forward. America wasn't listening to him anymore. Leavitt spoke quietly to herself. "I didn't break the system. I just stopped pretending it still works." Outside the Capitol, people began to gather. But it wasn't chaos. It was hope. They brought signs, candles, letters. No screaming. Just a quiet solidarity. Thank you, Caroline. We remember the forgotten. Truth still lives here. As twilight brushed Washington in blue and gold, church bells rang softly from a chapel near the Capitol. Inside, a handful of people sat in silence. No sermon. Just a screen replaying Leavitt's words. One man, Daniel, a retired miner from Montana, wiped his eyes. He'd been ignored. Screamed into the void for years. Tonight, someone heard him. I thought nobody spoke for folks like us anymore, he whispered. In her office, Leavitt scanned the documents again, combing every page. She had to be sure. No error. No exaggeration. Only truth. Her phone lit up. The president. You holding up? Trump asked. Yes, sir, she replied. Calm. Controlled. But she sounded older than she did that morning. You detonated a political bomb, he said, with a dry chuckle. I wasn't trying to, she said softly. It just happened. He paused, then said with gravitas. Well, it worked. But prepare yourself. They'll be coming for you. She looked out the window, at the crowd, the candles, the signs. I'm ready, she said. Because this isn't about me. By sunrise, Caroline Leavitt had become a national symbol, not through spin doctors or party donors, but from something rarer, truth spoken with courage. Her face appeared not in glossy magazine covers, but on handmade posters. Not in attack ads, but in Facebook posts from moms in Missouri, dads in Ohio. A mother in Nevada tweeted. My son asked, what does integrity look like? I showed him Caroline Leavitt's speech. That quote, and her searing line, spread like wildfire. Senator Schiff, you can mock my youth, but your name is in a federal investigation for misusing $12 million in COVID relief funds. It was painted on murals, posted in lunchrooms, echoed in classrooms. But inside the Capitol, tension boiled. Schiff's team? In crisis. Lawyers. Lobbyists. Panic. Allies began distancing themselves, quietly, cautiously. That morning, Leavitt's aide rushed in. Ma'am, oversight just called an emergency session. They want you in the room. She didn't blink. Then I'll be there. The aide looked nervous. Schiff might try to retaliate. Leavitt nodded. He can try. But I'm not afraid of him. I'm afraid of what happens when people stop daring to speak the truth. Her phone buzzed again. It was her mother. Your nephew saw you on TV, she whispered, voice trembling. They said you looked like a superhero. Leavitt exhaled, hands trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of what she was carrying now. Because this wasn't just a political moment anymore. This was a movement. Outside, the Capitol steps were packed. Not with angry protesters, but with quiet, defiant hope. A woman named Sarah, from Wisconsin, held a photo of her late husband. Their kids stood beside her. She handed a letter to a staffer. Please, make sure Miss Leavitt reads this. Moments later, as Leavitt made her way to the committee chamber, a Capitol guard handed it to her. She opened it. My husband died after our business was denied emergency funds. We later learned that money went to fake companies. Today, you reminded me that justice still matters. Thank you for not forgetting people like us. She stood there, motionless for a beat. Then tucked the letter in her coat. They're waiting, her aide whispered. Leavitt nodded. And walked in. The oversight committee room was tense. Schiff sat at the far end, his expression rigid, pale, unreadable. Cameras whirred. Reporters poised. Senator Margaret Evans leaned forward. Miss Leavitt, before we begin, would you like to say anything? Caroline stood. No notes. No press release. No rehearsed applause line. Just her voice, clear, direct, grounded. I didn't come here to perform. I didn't come to win points. She turned toward the committee. Then directly to Schiff. I came because people are hurting, and someone has to say it out loud. We sit in these chairs, Caroline Leavitt said, her voice low but unwavering, because the people placed their trust in us, with their hopes, their hard-earned money, their belief that someone would care. She paused, holding up a crumpled letter, Sarah's. But when that trust was broken, when relief money meant for desperate families vanished into shadows, they were left with debt, despair, and silence. She lifted her eyes, steady and sure. This letter isn't from someone asking for revenge. It's from a mother who wants honesty. That's all. And we owe her that, every one of us. A hush fell over the room. A few senators looked down. Some shifted in their seats, uneasy. Senator Laura Mitchell, long considered one of Adam Schiff's closest allies, leaned forward, voice crisp. Miss Leavitt, are you making a criminal accusation here? Caroline didn't blink. No, she said. I'm presenting evidence. She held up a thick, sealed red folder, the kind that carried weight in Washington. Inside are records, financial transactions, internal memos, sworn testimony from former staffers. They all point to one thing: COVID relief funds redirected into dummy organizations, controlled by companies tied directly to Senator Schiff's relatives. Gasps shot through the hearing room. Heads turned. Phones came out. Cameras zoomed in. Schiff's expression went slack. Leavitt pressed on, her voice like cold iron. This isn't personal. This is about responsibility. If we ignore this, if we look away, we're telling struggling Americans that corruption is acceptable, that no one will ever be held accountable. She turned, speaking now to the people beyond the walls. I didn't come here to play the game. I came here for the ones like Sarah. Like Linda. Like the millions of Americans who feel invisible in their own country. The chamber fell into stillness. The kind that felt holy. Honest. Caroline stood not as a spokesperson, not as a politician, but as a force of reckoning. And all across the nation, from living rooms to break rooms, eyes welled with tears, not from sadness, but from recognition. Suddenly, Schiff pushed back his chair. He was shaking. This is outrageous, he snapped. A coordinated hit job. Fabricated garbage. Caroline didn't even look his way. She calmly passed the folder to Committee Chair Margaret Evans. Evans looked at it, her expression tight, then handed it to the clerk. I'm calling for a formal review, she said. Seconded, Senator Emily Carter said sharply. Schiff collapsed back into his chair, pale and frantic. You're destroying this institution with your lies, he barked. Caroline turned toward him at last, voice like a blade through fog. No, Senator. We're restoring what you forgot, the truth. He bolted from the chamber, footsteps echoing. Reporters surged after him. He wasn't running from Caroline. He was running from what she'd revealed. Outside, the crowd had grown into the thousands. Not shouting. Not rioting. Just, present. Some held candles. Others waved faded flags. More than a few clutched handwritten signs. We hear you, Caroline. Accountability isn't a threat, it's a promise. A woman from Boise lifted her toddler and pointed to the screen mounted on a nearby truck. That's her, she whispered. She's why things might finally change. In a small-town ER in Georgia, Nurse Patricia wiped her hands and looked up at the corner TV. The sound was off, until she saw Leavitt's face. She turned up the volume. The screen showed Leavitt presenting the red folder. Schiff's outburst. The room frozen in disbelief. Patricia sank onto the edge of a hospital bed, overcome. Her brother had lost his job and home during the pandemic. Promised relief that never came. Now she knew where the money had gone. A patient beside her, frail but alert, whispered. She's fighting for folks like us. Patricia nodded through tears. She really is. She texted her sister just one word, watch. Back in her office, Caroline set the phone down. The president had just called. "You all right?" Trump asked. "I'm holding up," she said. "But it feels like I just set something off." He laughed softly. "You did. But in a good way. The country needed a moment like that." She didn't feel victorious. She felt, weight. Like she was carrying something sacred. "They'll come at you now," he warned. "I'm ready," she said. "Because this isn't about me anymore." Across the country, something rare was happening. People weren't just watching. They were feeling. At a Louisiana diner, Henry, a Vietnam vet, stood and removed his hat. "That girl," he said to no one in particular. "That girl speaks for all of us who thought nobody ever would again." On a foggy Oregon farm, a family who hadn't agreed on politics in years sat together, quiet, watching the footage on a laptop, crying, not arguing. In classrooms, teachers turned off their lessons to discuss what truth looks like when it costs you everything. And in small-town barbershops and airport lounges, one line echoed again and again. "Senator Schiff, you can mock my youth, but your name is in a federal investigation." This wasn't just about Schiff anymore. It was about what his actions symbolized. That night, Caroline sat in her office, hands clenched, the weight of the day settling deep. Mr. Robert, the elderly janitor, passed her door. He paused. "Thank you, Miss Leavitt," he said quietly. She stood, walked to him, and shook his hand. "No," she said. "Thank you, for reminding me why this matters." His eyes glistened. "You made people feel seen. That's no small thing." Later, as social media exploded and news tickers rolled, another envelope appeared on her desk, plain, with her name handwritten in careful blue ink. Inside was a photo, a young soldier in uniform holding a baby. The letter read, "Miss Leavitt, my husband died waiting for emergency aid that was promised but never came. He served honorably, but the system failed him. Then I saw you, and I felt seen for the first time. Thank you for giving him dignity, even in death. Please, don't stop." Caroline placed the letter gently on her desk, beside the photo. This wasn't politics. This was sacred duty. Outside, the crowd continued to grow. Among them, a boy named John, 10 years old, wheelchair-bound, a cancer survivor from Nevada. His hospital had almost shut down during the funding shortfalls. Too shy to deliver his letter in person, he held a simple sign. "My hospital almost closed. Thank you for fighting." A news camera caught the moment. The clip spread across the internet like wildfire. By morning, America knew his name. Inside, her aide stepped in, holding a tablet. "Ma'am, there's a boy outside with a sign. It's going viral." Caroline looked up from the soldier's letter. "What's his name?" she asked softly. "John," the aide said softly. Caroline rose from her desk. No press. No microphones. Just a mission. She stepped past the security barriers outside the Capitol, the kind designed to keep power in and people out. But today, the barrier meant nothing. She knelt before John, 10 years old, small hands folded, eyes wide with awe. She met him at eye level. "You're why I stand up," she said gently. "You're the brave one." John grinned. "You didn't yell. You just told the truth." Caroline pulled him into a hug. Cameras captured it, but not for spectacle. It was human. Real. By sunset, the image of Caroline and John hand in hand wasn't just viral, it was iconic. It hung in living rooms, firehouses, diners, and classrooms from Alabama to Alaska. That evening, the Senate committee reconvened. But something was different. The temperature of the room had changed. No noise. No whispers. And Schiff's seat, empty. Caroline entered without flourish. No flashy outfit. Just a modest pin of the American flag and a stack of worn, handwritten notes. As she passed through the chamber, the room stood. Not because tradition demanded it, but because her truth had earned it. Senator Susan Torres spoke quietly. "Miss Leavitt, would you like to say a few words?" She stepped forward. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I didn't come here to destroy reputations," she said. "I came because far too many people don't have a seat in this room, and someone needs to speak for them." A pause. She looked down, then back at the room. "I'm not proud of today's ugliness, but I am proud that this chamber finally turned toward the mirror." Then she did something no one expected. She sat. Silent. Not a word. Not a breath. 1 minute. Then 2. And in that stillness, something broke open. The senators didn't fidget. They didn't glance at their phones. Because that silence said everything. At first light the next morning, a man stood alone on the Capitol steps. His jacket was worn. His back stiff from time. In his weathered hands, a neatly folded American flag. William Bailey, a Vietnam veteran. No cameras. No press. Inside, Leavitt was reviewing reports, stacks of names, testimonies, budgets that had failed real people. An aide entered. "Ma'am, there's a man outside. He's a vet. No media. Just wants a moment with you." Caroline rose without hesitation. William stood still as she approached. He gave a crisp salute. She returned it, with reverence. His voice trembled. "I buried my brother after the pandemic. His business collapsed. The government blamed red tape. But now I see, it wasn't a mistake. It was theft." He handed her the flag. "It was my brother's. But today, I think you've honored it more than anyone in decades." Her voice cracked. "I can't accept this." William gently pushed it into her hands. "You already did, when you gave him a voice." She held it to her chest. And for the second time in as many days, the Capitol stood in complete silence, not for power, but for honor. Back inside, Schiff's seat remained conspicuously vacant. America noticed. Caroline returned to the committee chamber, flag still folded in her arms. She stepped to the podium. "I have one final file to submit." She held up a yellow envelope. "This isn't just about misspent money. It's about a pattern of deliberate harm. Political targeting. Districts denied aid because of how they voted." The room buzzed. Chairwoman Evans raised her hand. "Order." Caroline opened the envelope. She placed before the panel phone transcripts, internal memos, first-hand whistleblower reports. "This evidence shows Senator Schiff's office deliberately stalled emergency relief funds to certain counties for political gain, punishing Americans to make headlines." A gasp cut through the room like a blade. One senator rose, face pale. "If that's true, it's a federal crime." Caroline nodded. "It is. And it happened. I won't shout. The facts speak clearly enough." She placed the file down, backed away from the microphone. And in that still, thunderous moment, the nation felt the ground shift beneath its feet. All across America, screens glowed with the image of Caroline standing with the flag, her voice steady, her eyes glassy. In a Missouri kitchen, a retired mechanic dropped to his knees, whispering, "My father died begging for help, and no one listened. Until now." In a Seattle high school, students watched in complete silence. The teacher wiped her eyes. In homes from Maine to Montana, parents, divided by politics, sat shoulder to shoulder, crying, not arguing. Because this was bigger than a party. It was betrayal. And finally, someone had said it out loud. Back at the Capitol, Caroline wasn't at the press podium. She wasn't calling attention to herself. She was at a hospital. Sitting beside someone she never expected to meet. Sarah. The woman whose husband's photo she'd held up on the Senate floor. Sarah had fallen asleep, exhausted after a prayer vigil outside the chamber. But her 10-year-old son, Barbara, was awake. He looked up from his coloring book as Caroline entered. "You're the one who told the truth." She knelt. "I just said what your mom already knew." Barbara grinned and handed her a green crayon. "Keep this. In case you have to color the truth again." Caroline took it, eyes misty. And for the third time in 2 days, she cried. Back in the hearing room, an unannounced session began. Senator Margaret Evans stood at the center. Her voice didn't shake. It didn't soar. It simply stood, firm, resolute. Based on the overwhelming documentation and corroborated reports from federal investigators, the Ethics Committee will proceed with formal charges against Senator Adam Schiff for obstruction of emergency aid and abuse of power during a national crisis. Shock rolled through the room. But Evans pressed on. This motion was not driven by a party. It was driven by truth. And that truth was delivered not by force, but by courage. The courage of a young woman with nothing to gain, and everything to lose. We also recognize Miss Caroline Leavitt for her strength of character, her restraint, and her choice to put country before party. Caroline had just returned when the words echoed across the chamber. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. She simply listened. Because the truth didn't need a victory lap. One after another, senators stood. Even those who had once dismissed her, debated her, tried to discredit her, they rose to their feet. Applause filled the chamber. Soft at first. Then stronger. For the first time in years, Congress wasn't clapping for a partisan line. They were clapping for something rare, integrity. Outside, the news traveled like wildfire. Not because someone had fallen, but because someone had finally stood. In the hall, as Caroline walked past the marble columns of the Capitol, she heard a familiar voice, Mr. Robert, the janitor. He leaned close, his voice full of quiet pride. "You didn't just speak for us," he said. "You reminded us that honesty still lives here." She nodded once, touched her heart, and walked on. That evening, in small towns across America, something stirred. Church bells rang without being asked. In Georgia, Nebraska, and Virginia, families turned on their TVs, not for scandal, not for outrage, but to see hope with a face and a name. At a kitchen table in Mississippi, Clara, a single mother, closed her eyes in prayer. "Lord, bless the woman who spoke when no one else would." In Idaho, farmers halted their work mid-row to raise weather-worn flags a little higher. In Washington, candles flickered along Capitol steps. There were no chants. No slogans. Just stillness. And light. Because somehow, in one day, something long lost had returned. Truth. Caroline sat alone in her office. No reporters. No advisors. Just silence, and Barbara's green crayon. She opened a blank page in her notebook. And wrote one word. Remember. She wasn't here for attention. Not for politics. Not for points. She was here for the people who couldn't be. "Senator Schiff, you can mock my youth," she had said, "but your name is in a federal investigation for $12 million in misused COVID relief funds." That wasn't just a statement. It was a shockwave. And America felt it. As night settled in, the city exhaled. For the first time in years, Washington wasn't buzzing with spin or scandal. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after truth is spoken aloud. The next morning, something unexpected happened. Anger across the country seemed to soften. Talk radio quieted. Schools began their day with moments of reflection. Even late-night shows held back their jokes. From mayors in Oregon to city leaders in Alabama, Caroline's words were quoted, not as sound bites, but as turning points. Caroline walked into the White House press room with no teleprompter. No entourage. Just a single folded paper. She unfolded it, her voice even and warm. The truth doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs someone brave enough to carry it into the dark. She met the gaze of the reporters. "I didn't expose Adam Schiff out of spite. I did it because silence is becoming this country's slow death. I spoke for the people no one sees, the nurses, the farmers, the factory workers, the mothers just trying to hold on. She paused. Then added, plainly. And if I had to, I would do it again. The video traveled not just across the US, but across oceans. It wasn't a speech. It was a salve. Wherever it played, hearts didn't harden. They opened. That evening, Caroline walked back through the Capitol alone. No cameras followed. She passed Schiff's empty seat. She paused beside it, looked at it for a long moment. Then whispered. This was once a throne built on ego. And kept walking. Outside the hearing room, John had returned. The boy from Nevada, wrapped in a blanket, his mother behind him. He held out a folded piece of paper. Caroline knelt beside him. Inside was a drawing, her standing on a mountain, with stick figures below holding signs. Justice. My town. Truth. Dad. Hope. Tears welled in her eyes. I didn't make it to the top on my own, she said softly. You all lifted me. John grinned. You didn't yell. You just stood tall. She hugged him tightly, then looked up at the Capitol dome glowing in the dusk. I didn't come to win, she whispered. I came to serve. And in that quiet sentence, she said more than most politicians say in a lifetime. That night, she returned home to Virginia. No cameras. No banners. Just the porch, the breeze, and the stars. A knock came at the door. It was Sarah, the widow. And Barbara, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. I needed to thank you face to face, Sarah said. Caroline shook her head. You don't have to. I didn't do that much. Sarah took her hand. You gave people like me a voice, when we didn't believe we had one. Barbara added, eyes wide. You made my mom believe again. Caroline couldn't answer. Not with words. A single tear rolled down her cheek. Not for sorrow. Not for pressure. For all the people who had carried her when her voice shook. For those whose names never make headlines, but whose lives deserve dignity. Across the nation, her message didn't fade. It grew. In a Kentucky diner, Ashley, a waitress, paused mid-shift, eyes wet as she watched Caroline's speech. In a Wisconsin factory, break time was silent. Workers crowded around one phone, watching, nodding. In a Florida elementary classroom, a teacher named Miss Emily asked her students, "What does courage look like?" A boy raised his hand and said, "It looks like Miss Caroline." Because she told the truth, even when no one else would. On social media, people weren't shouting. They were sharing. Hashtag Leavitt Truth. Hashtag HopeSpoken. Hashtag She Stood For Us. The posts weren't about politics. They were stories. Of grief. Of loss. Of finally being seen. Caroline didn't chase the attention. She returned to her post, serving the administration as she had before. But her heart? It stayed with Sarah. With Barbara. With John. With the silent. With the hopeful. She never stopped hearing them. She kept Barbara's crayon on her desk, not for decoration, but for remembrance. It was a small thing. But in its color lived a promise. To keep fighting for the forgotten. On Truth Social, President Trump posted a rare personal message. Caroline Leavitt, the flame of truth. Let this be a warning to every corrupt politician still hiding behind titles. The words landed hard. Schiff's isolation in Washington grew colder by the hour. Meanwhile, the Senate Ethics Committee fast-tracked its inquiry. Headlines blared across the country. Leavitt ignites justice. Capitol hearings turn moral. The press secretary who wouldn't blink. But for Caroline, justice wasn't a headline. It wasn't vengeance. It was restoration. Giving a voice back to the millions who were left behind when the system shut the door. In a modest church in Georgia, a pastor stood at the pulpit, holding a letter from one of his oldest parishioners. He read it aloud. I had lost faith, not in God, but in government. Miss Leavitt reminded me that honesty can still live in high places. In a Montana high school, students crowded around a bulletin board lined with handmade posters. Drawings of Caroline standing tall beside the American flag. Words scrawled across them. Thank you for fighting for us. Back in Washington, the crowd hadn't left the Capitol steps. They didn't gather in anger. They came in gratitude. Among them, Maria, a mother from Arizona, stood holding a photograph of her teenage son who died during the pandemic, lost in the chaos of delayed relief. Through tears, she spoke to a reporter nearby. Caroline didn't just talk. She listened. She heard us. Her words, like Leavitt's, didn't spark outrage. They soothed. They healed. Caroline knew the storm hadn't passed. The road ahead was rough and political backlash inevitable. Her name would be twisted, her motives questioned. But fear didn't follow her. Because she had chosen this path, not for praise, but for people like John, Sarah, Maria, Barbara, and all the others who thought Washington had forgotten them. The story of Caroline Leavitt confronting Senator Adam Schiff at the Capitol wasn't just a political moment. It was a reckoning. A mirror held up to a nation asking, who speaks for us? She stood not for applause. She stood for trust. For decency. For accountability in a time starved of all three. With undeniable evidence in hand, and the courage to speak without bitterness, she exposed what many feared would stay hidden. But the most powerful part wasn't what she revealed. It was how she did it. A quiet minute of silence. A hug for a child. A folded flag. A green crayon placed beside her files. These weren't props. They were symbols. That truth isn't a weapon. It's a bridge. Between government and citizen. Between the powerful and the powerless. Between those who've always had a voice, and those who never did. This story is more than an account of political misconduct. It's a reminder that even in an America divided by distrust, there is room, and need, for courage that listens and speaks without cruelty. Let Leavitt's example guide us. Speak the truth, even when it's hard. Do it with conviction, but also with grace. Challenge power, but carry compassion. Honor people's pain, then act with purpose. If you work, teach, raise a family, or serve your community, you, too, can stand up like Caroline did. Listen to voices like Sarah's, voices buried under silence. Remember the letter. The crayon. The folded flag. And carry those values forward. Honesty. Empathy. Accountability. Because they don't just change politics. They heal nations.